Hey everybody, Tom Salemi here. Welcome back to the Device Talks Weekly podcast. Thanks for joining us. In the words of Mark Twain, or the altered words of Mark Twain, forgive me for the long podcast. I didn't have time to put together a short one. We've been trying to track the SVB story, and my hope was to sort of weave different points of view into one coherent narrative, but the story keeps changing, the narrative keeps changing. So what I did was I talked to folks who I think represent the affected groups in Medtech. We'll talk with Brian Lord. He's the CEO of Pristine Surgical. He was on the podcast just a few weeks ago, but he wrote a great piece on LinkedIn, the 10 things he did as a startup CEO to manage his exposure, or his company's exposure to the SVB meltdown. Then we bring back our old friend Paul Grand, CEO of Medtech Innovator. He's giving us an investor perspective. I talked to some VCs privately, but Paul's great in sharing his opinions on the podcast, and it's always great to have him back. And finally, Joe Mullings will be on as well. Again, he was on recently, but I spoke with him briefly about the SVB fallout, about what this means, about who's at fault. This is an unusual situation. Fault may be too strong a word, but in many past situations, the boogeyman for MedTech has always been an exterior force. The FDA reimbursement point to what you want, Wall Street investors. This one was not necessarily medtech induced, but you could point fingers at some of the venture capital world who perhaps unnecessarily made a run in the bank. As we'll get into in the podcast, there's a lot of nuance to that statement. Folks don't want to be the last person standing when the music stops. They want to have a chair, so it's human nature, but it's an unfortunate outcome. As I'm recording this, I just read that SVB is filing for Chapter 11. So once again, the story continues to unfold. So we put together this podcast. I think it gives a good representation of what's going on, how folks are impacted, and maybe where we're headed. It's certainly uncertain. That's the only thing that we're certain of. But SVB was a force in the innovation sector. And as we geeked out in the podcast, it was really the wall that was to our world, and seeing it crumble as it has is really shocking, and we'll continue to feel it for some time to come. But we do get through the other side. Things will happen. Good things will happen as a result of this. Companies will be created. Relationships will be formed. New careers will be started. So it's easy to get despondent, but it's important to focus on a bigger picture for yourself and for the industry. So we will get through this, but we can't get through it. I think we get through it quicker if we are honest about where we are today. So once again, we've got Brian Lord of Pristine Surgical, Paul Grand of Medtech Innovator, Joe Mullings of the Mullings Group. I'll weave them in. We'll kick off with the interview I did with Brian Lord. I actually talked to him on Monday. I talked to Joe on Wednesday, and I talked to Paul Grand on Thursday. And I think it's important to share those days because, again, the story just keeps evolving. So there may be some inconsistencies with the conversations, but I don't think so. I think the theme is pretty common. Before we get into the podcast, once again, we'll be getting together at DeviceTalks Boston. The attendance numbers are great. Registration numbers are great. Thank you to everyone who's stepped up. It's going to be a fantastic couple of days. I'm solidifying the agenda, and the only reason it's not solid yet is because more people want to participate and share their stories. So I'm trying to accommodate as many people as we can, and I want you to be there. So please go to DeviceTalks.com to register for DeviceTalks Boston. It's happening May 10th and 11th at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. So don't miss out. It's going to be informative, and I think it's important for us for us all to get together and to connect and learn and move forward. So again, DeviceTalks Boston, May 10th and 11th. Also, we'll be rolling out our new podcast seasons shortly, including a new season of Intuitive, a new season of Medtronic, a new season of Stryker, and our two new series. Boston Scientific Talks will be rolling out this month, March 29th, and Abbott Talks, proud to say, is joining the Device Talks podcast family, and that'll be out in a couple of months, probably June. So lots going on here. Without any further delay, I'm going to start this podcast. And once again, we're not going to start with the Newsmakers. We'll start with my interview with Brian Lord. And then we'll get into the Newsmakers with Paul Grand, and then the interview with Joe Mullings, and then we'll finish up with Paul Grand again. So thanks for listening, everybody. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
So Brian Lord, welcome back to the podcast.
Tom, I didn't expect to be talking to you so soon. It's good to be back with you.
Yeah, well, these are strange times, right? And before I pushed record, we were talking a bit about how quickly the news sort of unfolded, and you were traveling from one location to the next when things went the way they went. But I want to back up just for a moment and just sort of, I'm not a CEO, I've never run a startup. I didn't actually quite understand the impact until someone explained to me that, the companies would not be able to access the funds that they raised. And that was a big issue facing. So explain to me exactly, how did SVB play into Pristine Surgical? Were they the sole holder of your money? Did you raise venture debt from them? What was your relationship like with SVB?
Yeah, when we were founded, we had a relationship with kind of a regional bank that just frankly wasn't very savvy with the ways of tech companies, wasn't very nimble with, some of just the day-to-day mechanics. And, Silicon Valley Bank certainly has built a franchise around catering to and serving as their target market tech companies like us, venture funds that fund us, lenders and the like, and have really been, facilitator of the whole ecosystem. So, for us to move our business over to Silicon Valley Bank, just like, whatever the statistics have said, 60 or 70% of sort of the venture backed, it's an extraordinary franchise. But of course, in hindsight, extraordinary concentration as well. For us to be able to move over, into that platform, frankly, they did a phenomenal job of serving, the target customer base like ours that we talked about. Nimble, full service, ability to work on a web-based interface that makes, travel schedules and the ability to keep things moving far more convenient. So for us, it made sense to move over to more of a full service shop, and I think you probably think in doing so that if you're moving from sort of a regional bank into some, a larger platform that's whatever the reports are, the 16th largest in the country, you probably actually buy a bit of, stability as well, to the extent that even crosses your mind, right? In hindsight, certainly we'll be unraveling some of the, macroeconomic and policy, issues around regulation and the like that smarter people than me will have a lot to say about. But for the period of time as a customer of the bank, they did a phenomenal job serving. So to answer your question, yeah, we were not a borrower of the bank. We have a lending relationship with another institution who was phenomenal through the course of all of this. But was our primary account, and so the cash that our operating cash was concentrated really in that bank. And when you're a startup company, you don't have the cash management sort of institutions that large Fortune 500,
right.
But they got whole departments moving that around and optimizing balances. At the end of the day, it's certainly for 97% of the depositors, for Silicon Valley Bank and us included, at more than what the FDIC, insured amount is. But, that's something that should be expected for companies with the type of, expense base they operate also on a monthly basis as well.
Yeah. And looking back, I think you could see the concentration, like you said, being like, perhaps that's something that we all should have picked up on as maybe not the soundest approach. But looking at what sort of unfolded with Silicon Valley Bank, I'm not a finance guy, obviously, but from what I've read and have been told, I haven't seen any huge red flags that there were bad loans involved or they were loaded up on crypto or anything too crazy. Looking back now, do you see anything that you said, gee, I really wish I had kind of picked up on that?
Well, you'd have to have read and be a bank analyst to read, deep into their 10Ks and 10Qs. And there are a lot of smart people that get paid to do that every day and, track that as a publicly traded stock. That's the kind of things they're watching. They filed an 8K that gave an announcement of their need to shore up their balance sheet with an equity offering. And, that flagged some challenges that market sort of picked up on very quickly. But in amongst everything else that was going on, I also, as we chatted not too long ago, as it turns out, as a first-time CEO, I was sort of discussing my newness to the medtech space, or at least relative newness to the medtech space. In this particular instance, having been a former corporate lawyer and having an MBA, it actually came in pretty useful trying to figure out what the heck was going on. I think the short answer is Silicon Valley Bank did, I think, on its face, a wise thing by parking its excess capital in long-term treasuries that had fixed interest rates associated with them. You would look on their face and say, well, what more sound instrument could you put your investments in than 10-year, U.S. treasuries? Certainly not, Lehman mortgage-backed securities that were volatile and packaged and stripped up and repackaged and all of that kind of stuff to juice returns. This was actually on its face a very sound investment instruments that their excess capital was placed in. What they didn't apparently adjust for was interest rate risk. And so as interest rates rise, they were forced to pay larger and larger sums to their depositors as the Fed interest rates climbed. And of course, it's climbed at spectacular rates. And they're turned around and receiving fixed rates on their own deposits or their own reserves. And that spread became increasingly expensive. And so what you would expect in those types of instances is that they would have participated in certain hedging strategies, which would have offset the interest rate risk that they were associated with or exposed to. But apparently that wasn't done. And that was to say the least, the Achilles heel and more that they were exposed to, and ultimately, at least from my vantage point of this current state, state of affairs, was the unraveling of the bank. So look, stay tuned, and there'll be much more cogent, analyses that come in the days ahead. But that's, as things are breaking, my best take on what happened. That is not the kind of thing, right, that you would be able to, as a customer of the bank, be able to diligence and discern about the presence or not of their hedging against interest rate, long-term interest rate or short-term changes in interest rates as it were, and what their exposure would be to that.
Absolutely. So let's focus on your response. I loved your post on LinkedIn. You have one CEO's playbook for SVP depositors, and it's got a list of, I think, 10 steps, which are always good. It's always good to get it up to 10, and they're all really good steps. But before we get into I sort of want to understand what happened before item one. Like, when did you realize that we need to, I as CEO, I need to act here? What was the news? What was the gut feeling you had? What was the moment you realized that there's a giant wave heading my way and we need to get to something that floats?
Thursday night. It was about maybe 8 o'clock or so, I guess, East Coast. No, it was about 8 o'clock Pacific time. We were at Las Vegas at the Academy of Orthopedics conference. And as mentioned, got back to my hotel, doing a little bit of, surfing and catching up on the news as what was going on. And, it hit me between the eyes when I saw Silicon Valley Bank stock had dropped 60% in a single day. Then you watch and you sort of see some of the chatter and, dig in a little bit deeper into some, into Twitter and whatever else. And you see the talking heads certainly not sitting still. And so I sent out a note to the board that evening, said, hey, I want to flag this. We're getting our team together first thing in the morning. Got my CFO on the West Coast and my controller on the East Coast and our lender on the East Coast. And we're going to put together, as well as our legal counsel on the East Coast, we're going to put together a working group and figure out our strategy to that. Gosh, we probably had our game plan figured out by 9:30 in the morning. And, by that time, the run was on. So it was fast moving. I don't know, as again, some of the chatter has been that, whether there were sort of select conversations happening with certain groups and portfolio companies of certain funds and the like on Thursday, but this was not, a slow burning fire, right? This was a flash fire that really started, and it seems Thursday morning, flashed, with a 60% drop by Thursday night, and by Friday, the run was on. So it happened quickly.
We talked about this before, and I think I just already said it. You're a first-time CEO, really hadn't led a company before. How did you devise this plan? Did it sort of just unfold step by step, or did you sit down, and maybe we could go through some high points of it. Did you sit down on a piece of paper and write down, we're here and we need to get there? How do you react to this sort of crisis? Well,
I guess for starters, I would say, it's fortunate this isn't my first financial challenge that I've been a part of, right? Not just CEO stuff, but as an advisor and managing transactions that always has hiccups coming down. So I guess a sort of financial crisis under pressure wasn't for me first time. So that was sort of, I guess, helpful. But to answer your question, look, we got a couple of very financially savvy board members. You've got the team that I talked about and our lender. I think the most important thing that you can do is just get on the horn and start talking to folks and try to figure out what the circumstances are. Talk, understand. I had a couple of shareholders. We got a large and dispersed shareholder base. A couple of shareholders who was very helpful. It's the sort of good news of being the kind of CEO I am. Everybody in the company, including every shareholder, has got my cell phone number, has got my email address. That means that I get inbound stuff every so often. In this particular case, it was very helpful inbound stuff. So, I had a sort of network out that was feeding information and helping, an understanding of what was breaking. And, look, at the end of the day, it wasn't that complicated either. You try to get into the wire queue and try to get some or all of your money, queued up and move out as you kind of get a sense for what's transpiring. I think, look, I think appropriately, some teeth are going to be gnashed about some of the things that were going on and it's sort of in the collectives in sort of these private circles beforehand, and whether it was really necessary to sort of make the kind of macro move on the bank that sort of happened when large swaths of money sort of, lurch and move out. For us, it's a no-brainer. We're a small rounding error in the grand scheme of the billions of dollars of banking. And so we did our best to see if we couldn't get at least some of our money moved to another place. It was pretty clear what was happening. The site was gummed up and things weren't moving. So, we devised that plan kind of on the fly. I think there's an obvious question, and I talked with a few of my colleagues about, do you keep your head low or do you share? And, it was unanimous. Look, we feel like we're ahead of the curve in terms of what's going on. We've got a lot of colleagues out there that probably have the benefit of perhaps being a sales or marketing oriented CFO or CEO, as we talked about, right? That may not have been through some of these situations. And so we just felt like as we were starting to get a game plan put together, that it was an obvious thing to do to share that with folks. And it's no way you can kind of know it's frankly even accuracy, but as you discussed, sort of just said, look, this is one guy's plan and how we're going to take it for what it's worth. And as you know, the spirit on LinkedIn is kind of that same, that same attitude. So I got some, some attaboys for that. And that was fine. More importantly, I think we were all trying to figure it out together.
Absolutely. So I do encourage people to follow you on LinkedIn. 1 through 7, I think, are great, but they're pretty step by step. And I think people should definitely check it out. But I want to jump to number 8. I really like the way you put it. Lean on your friends and be observant. The true nature of those relationships reveal themselves in a crisis. Reciprocate richly when this too passes. Where did that come from? Did you reach out to folks who were generous and very supportive and those who were not? I'm just kind of curious what led to that writing, because it's a really interesting point.
Well, there wasn't any sort of underhanded sting that was meant by that. It actually was,
and I don't read it that way, Nick. I don't mean to say that you were digging at someone. That's not my question.
No, I totally understand. I totally understand the question. And it wasn't in our circumstance a compare and contrast. I, just put a post up and I think that's what prompted the outreach and said we were able to get all of our money out and wish the same for everybody else, and just expressed a lot of pride in how we rallied. So when, you're in the foxhole, there's one of two ways you can go, right? That you can all turn on each other, or you can rally and, move forward. The things that we do as CEOs and the things that I have cared about through building Pristine, the rewards for some of those efforts of making sure that we communicate with folks, make sure that we've got a collaborative board environment, to make sure that we know each other and have established a level of trust with each other are rewarded in those instances. And I was just thinking as I was writing that, it wasn't a dig at anybody in my circumstance, but I could only imagine how others of my colleagues who perhaps are in the middle of a board fracas or whatever else might have broken out, in the days or weeks, heading up to it, trying to close the financing and not getting, sort of fighting over final terms, whatever else. And then this curveball hits. And, you can see potential for opportunism to rear its ugly head, right? And I think that it's important to remind people that there's a cost to that opportunism. And I think we as CEOs need to remind people that we're supposed to have long memories for those sorts of things. And our job is to build an enterprise of coordinated people through a common mission. And, I just don't have a lot of patience for folks that, are not ready to get on board. The enemy is out there, right? The enemy is in the marketplace. It's about the old technologies that we're trying to replace with new technologies. And opportunism does not have a place when you're trying to do something, disruptive and new. It's hard enough the way it is. And so I think we need to be willing to call people to task for that. And these are times where you don't do it in the moment, but you put those markers down and you let people know that that's an important part of an enterprise's success. Do
you have any thoughts or opinions of the folks who on Thursday drew their money out completely from SVB and participated in that effort, that run on the bank? And if you don't, that's fine. Again, I'm not looking for negativity, but I did talk with a VC who got a message, tell all your companies to do this. And he was conflicted. And he said, I don't want to be part of that problem, but I also want to serve my companies well. How do you view that whole transaction? And if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine too. So
I guess for somebody that posts from time to time on LinkedIn, it's okay to admit that there are also some posts that got deleted before I hit the post button.
That's usually a good practice. We'll leave that one there.
It's in the draft. If there is such a thing, it's in the draft. The draft or the recycle bin. It's there for a reason, because I wanted to give some thought to it rather than say it in the emotion of the moment. But look, I guess take the micro sort of commentary about what I just said and then translate that into a macro sense. And you can probably get a sense for where my head is on that. It's not cool to be an opportunist when it's unnecessary, and it's not cool to shout, fire in a crowded movie theater. And, there's a lot of extenuating circumstances, which is why it's hard for me to be overly critical. But in the moment, look, I don't know that this needed to happen. And, there'll be more time to untangle this in the weeks ahead. I will say that, lost in all this is 8,000 employees who lost their job over the course of this last 72 hours as well. Who, in addition to all of us who are trying to figure out how we're going to make payroll, they're also trying to figure out where their career is going to go, where their mortgage payments are going to be made. And, a lot of the collateral damage lies there too. And my heart goes out to all of those folks. Talented, hardworking, dedicated people who, we haven't probably said enough about either. And those folks, got trampled just like everybody else in the rush for the exits.
Yeah. Yep. And final question. You mentioned up top that the reason you moved over to Silicon Valley Bank was because of their ability to really serve startups well. And another VC I talked to really is worried that the money is being restored, and that's great. That's vital and important. But Silicon Valley Bank, particularly as a venture lender, which I know you didn't have them as a lender, but also as a service provider, really catered to the startups and kind of forced other banks to raise their game a bit and do the same. That sort of innovative driver is gone for now, at least. I'm sure one will come and rise and take its place eventually. But how do you feel about that? Do you feel like the startup world, tech and medtech, has really lost a champion? It's going to take a while to get that kind of positive force back?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how to prognosticate what the future will hold. I think if somebody's smart and enterprising there, they'll recapitalize that franchise and look, to a certain extent, even the brand, and continue to deliver those needed services. The reason that the bank failed was not because there wasn't demand for the services and the, frankly, large niche that they carved out and dominated. There are lots of banks that wanted to be in the position that they were. If my analysis from a few minutes ago is correct, it failed because of risk management and execution. Those are two very, very different reasons for failure. Mm-hmm. So if you shore that up, the market says we want a catalyst like a Silicon Valley Bank to serve customers like ours. And, there were some VCs that I thought did a laudable job as, things were unfolding, saying a similar thing, saying, look, we stand by the role that this bank has played, and we want to continue to be, customers and depositors of either this bank if it's saved or bought, or of a future, replacement of that. And I, stand up and say absolutely as well for what small part we play in that discussion. So Yeah, look, if there's a hole left, it'll be a giant loss for the industry. A lot of people, and rightfully so, right, sort of roll their eyes at sort of squishy words like catalyst and, other things like that. But we will see the loss of a catalyst and see what that is like if this hole isn't filled with another, sort of tailored, enterprising, innovation-centric, financial player in this space. And one more bit, and as my thoughts sort of roll around, that notion, I think, of the VCs stepping up and sort of talking about that, I want to just reiterate. The VCs, I think, have a critical role to play in helping stand up this, whatever this replacement is. I didn't know this, but I learned it. The FDIC apparently is funded by Wall Street. It's not funded by the taxpayer. Oh. If you take a similar analogy here, an SVB or an SVB-like entity should be supported fully by the financial services industry that supports our innovation infrastructure. And it's one thing to just be a customer and a depositor, but I think, and I would hope that some of the captains of finance in our particular venture market get together and talk about how they can be, a catalyst to replace this catalyst, if you don't mind the turn of phrase. So We'll see. But I think this is an opportunity for people to step up and build back better, as it were. And we'll see how that plays out. I sure hope that's the way this goes.
Absolutely. And I'll end it on item 10, which was lead. We live in extraordinary times. You'll tell your grandkids about what's going on right now, how you managed, and you'll be proud. So I think that's a good way to look at this experience, something that I guess we'll all remember and grow from.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And thanks for reaching out. It's fun to share some of these thoughts. It is extraordinary times, and we'll see it continue to play out. So thanks for being a catalyst for us all.
Thanks for joining us, Brian. All right, it was great to hear from Brian Lord. Before we begin, the Newmarker's Newsmakers want to let you know that DeviceTalks Tuesday is happening Tuesday at 4 p.m. Very happy to have Acuity MD as part of DeviceTalks Tuesdays, and this is going to be a great story for commercial stage and pre-commercial startups. Acuity MD has a platform that allows you to identify your customers, to have data, info, intelligence about your customers. And in this presentation on Tuesday, you're going to hear how Acuity MD helped a startup, a pre-commercial company, grow to a size that got it acquired. So it's a positive story, it's a hopeful story, and it's one you should certainly check out. Go to DeviceTalks.com, register for our upcoming DeviceTalks Tuesdays. All of them are free. They're all available to watch live or on demand. You can ask questions, you get PowerPoints, lots of great data for you, lots of great knowledge, and the ability to expand your skill set, to build your brand, and to just know more in medtech better. So go to DeviceTalks.com to check out our upcoming selection of DeviceTalks Tuesdays, including this great one coming up, sponsored by Acuity MD. Chris Newmarker, how is it going over there in that foxhole? Are you keeping your head down?
Yep, I'm trying to. I'm like this. We're talking on Thursday afternoon, and I've got some electricians downstairs finally getting rid of our 1980s era track lighting. So
why? It'll be back in style in just a few more years. You're gonna be regretting this.
That stuff will never go back in style.
That's what we said about leggings.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, we've got our man in the booth, Paul Grant of Medtech Innovator, back. Paul, how are you?
Paul. I am doing well. Great to be back here in the booth as always, and I miss it here. I feel like it's been a little while. It's been like a month or two. I don't know how that went by so fast, but it's great to be back.
It's been quite a week, and Paul, I do have to say, I was worried that when you popped on here, I mean, people can't see you, but I was worried that you're gonna have like totally white hair like coming on here after the past week. So I'm glad to see you retained your hair color, after the week we've been through.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of gray, and there may be some less hair. Maybe I may have pulled some out over the weekend for sure. That was a long. I went on a whole bunch of walks with my wife this weekend talking about this whole thing. And by the time we were done walking, she came home and said, "Hey, I think we should move some money around between our various bank accounts." But it was incredibly stressful. It It was stressful from, mentally from the very beginning, my thinking was always that there would be some kind of security for the deposits. That was what it was unthinkable. The opposite was unthinkable. So I spent the whole weekend and even Thursday and Friday when I was talking with people thinking there's going to be some kind of security for the deposits. There's no way the banking industry can allow this to happen. Not just Silicon Valley Bank, but just the broader implication. So I was fairly confident that there would be some kind of we'd wake up Monday morning with some good news. But it's the obviously it's the ripple effects. Maybe a better term would be it's the aftershocks.
Yeah.
That concern me the most of what this is going to do to an industry and to not just medtech but in general, where it's hard to raise funding and anything that makes that less confident for people is not a good thing. So.
Well, it's let's just end the suspense. The number one, the Newmarker's Newsmakers is going to be Silicon Valley Bank. So we might just hit at the top. Paul, so you and I talked last Friday and we thought about getting you on the podcast, like just kind of speaking to it, but we were both, I think, rightly stunned and didn't really know what could be said. But you had shared that you received an email from someone, and a lot of these texts went around, warning you that you might want to get your money out, or at least advise your companies about what's going on. And you were sort of faced with, do you contribute to the problem, which I think was largely a VC sort of induced hysteria. Maybe
it was
not
a good
without
old-fashioned
cause,
bank run,
but it was definitely It's a Wonderful Life. Or you had you opted, I think, instead for, well, I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to sort of stick with the partners that we've built this innovation economy with. What can you take us back a bit to just those first moments of when trouble started to brew and what unfolded for you?
Sure. So as you said, I was really hesitant to talk too much about this publicly on Friday when there was just so little to say other than inciting panic.
Yeah.
And I felt like everything I would say would be twisted potentially by somebody to say, oh, that's a great reason to pull our money, or that's a great reason to not, close this round or whatever else. And Paul Grant said so. So, I always worry about that. No matter what I say, there's always someone can always put something, take something out of context. So I was a little bit hesitant to talk about it on Friday, but I was talking with a lot of our companies, as you might imagine, talking with people from Silicon Valley Bank, talking with all sorts of people about this. And so the reality is that when I look at, those first moments, as you said, what was going on, there were a lot of people, rightly looking at what was happening with Silicon Valley Bank and saying, hey, should we be pulling our money out? Some people are saying you got to get every single Medtech Innovator company on the line and tell them to pull their money out. That's what other people are doing. People are like, hey, I'm reading the message boards and, in various places, and they're saying everyone's pulling their money. And I think the reality is from a protective stance, you have to make sure there's a self-preservation thing where you want to make sure you can cover your payroll and not just for next week, but for a while. And so I think the prudent thing when, you don't want to be the last man standing, right? I think that's the general philosophy that drove the bank run is, principles are one thing, but who wants to be the last man standing? So when they turn the music off, you don't want to be the one without the chair.
Right.
So I did not advocate that all the medtech innovator companies pull their money out of Silicon Valley Bank. That was not my position. But I absolutely told people they should be protective of payroll and make sure they're able to cover things. Because as I said, I did not think there was any scenario in which people would not be able to access their funding. But I was a little bit worried about for how long, would it be 2 weeks, 3 weeks? So, you have to just basically make sure you have protection for your payroll for some period of time. But the reality is, there could have been a scenario in which I was completely wrong. And they said, hey, you're good for 50% of your money. And people were going, okay, that's $3 million or $5 million that I don't have anymore. And what do I do now?
Right.
So, so that's the biggest, for me, the big thing is, I want to be part of the solution and I'm not part of the problem. I don't like inciting panic. I don't like, because it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's what I kept telling people.
Yep.
If we tell everybody to pull their money, then there's no question the bank is going to collapse. And, and that's absolutely what caused this. So, there's the other things in the background that were brewing that led to it in the first place. But I'm saying that the immediate collapse was people trying to pull $40 billion out in one day. That doesn't go so well.
I remember a quote from that weekend. I mean, it was really uncertain. I mean, there was even like a one report that I read where, they actually just, somebody had said something to the effect of like, if the deposits aren't backed up entirely, like this could wipe out an entire generation of startups, including, startups in our space, in the medical device space. So, I mean, it was
the fear that is very, something that I think everybody needs to be aware of is that we've been in a challenging environment for fundraising for a while, and a lot of investors, we've seen this before, right? You mentioned it after the last financial crisis, all of the brand name Medtech venture funds left the early stage space. They were gone, they're gone, all of them. And, and not that the funding completely dried up, but all of the big venture funds got out of it because their LPs told them they had to, or they weren't going to have capital calls honored, and people listened to their limited partners. So ultimately, we lost a lot of very, very smart people who were investing in the medtech space, and they were replaced by people who had good hearts and wanted to support early stage medical innovation, angels, and all these other people, private equity, family offices, blah, blah, blah. But who had very little experience in medical technology and were now advising startups or tech investors and people who just don't know how to bring medical products to the market. So, we've seen this before. And now in recent years, we've had a resurgence of medtech venture funds again, which I've been really excited about, early stage funds and mid stage and later stage. And I want to see more of them, not less of them. And, I believe, you've been doing a great series on the resilience of the medtech sector.
Yeah.
Are we recession proof? And of course, nobody's recession proof, but we're certainly better than most. You're going to, unfortunately, we're all pretty certain that our health is the most important thing. And I think that, if anyone's been sick, they feel that way, or if they have a loved one who is.
Yeah.
So this industry isn't going away. But the funding can be pulled. It's very easy for people to go, oh, too much riskier, let's go somewhere else. And I think what this represents for me is that big existential threat that maybe the funding will just dry up for everybody in tech and not just med tech, and people will go elsewhere for a while. That's the scary thing. And so then people just have to be prepared for how do we weather that storm. And I don't believe this is over. I don't believe the fact that the deposits were guaranteed means that, okay, we can all just go back to business as usual. I think people have to be very proactive about their planning and be fiscally prudent and, capital efficient and all the things that people need to be. And I'm not advocating at all for mass layoffs. That would be terrible. I'm just saying that people need to be realistic and understand that not just diversifying in different banks, but they need to be planning for a future where they may need to do, the same with less, or immediately be, and a lot of them are. A lot of our companies are stepping up their fundraising efforts, whether it's from internal funding rounds from their existing funds who are very supportive and are doubling down on them, or whether it's accelerating rounds that they were planning on doing later. Maybe they're stepping up those efforts because if they were close to closing somebody and those people are still excited, there's a lot of dry powder out there. There's a lot of people raised a lot of money at venture funds in the last several years, and they need to deploy that capital. So I think that is what I hope is that people who are exciting before are going to close rounds, and people who are smart are going to be increasing that velocity towards their next round.
Well, I definitely want to explore sort of the aftershock, like you said earlier, because I think we saw our SVB go down, and for me, it was kind of like the wall in Game of Thrones. Like once it goes down, you're like, oh my God, like what do we do now? So I want to explore the what do we do now. Hopefully, there are no White Walkers that we have to deal with. But let's start rolling out the Newmarker's Newsmakers, Chris, and we'll come back to this at the end when we actually will hit upon number one, which is this very topic.
We'll go through this really quick, and then we'll get back to SVB. Number 5 on the list, we've got Perkin Elmer divested its applied food and enterprise services businesses, and they're now going to be, focused as a high growth life sciences and diagnostics business. New name, brand, ticker symbol, that's all to come. In the second quarter of this year, but we're going to see them really. Focused, just really laser focused on that life sciences and diagnostics business. I
give this a super good news rating. I think this is great.
Yeah.
Right. I think this spinouts are great.
News.
I think it's focused. I think it's great to be focused on life sciences. It can only mean good things for folks in our industry. Paul?
Oh, I agree completely. We have our BioTools Innovator Accelerator.
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
And having PE more focused on this sector is good to me. So. Yeah. I'm excited about it. It's great.
That's some good news.
Good news. Yay! Good news, yay! Good news, people. Yay! What's number 4?
More good news. Here we go.
We're
just handing out some good news. We got Fire One closing a $25 million financing round, and this financing round included an investment from Medtronic. So Medtronic has interest in Fire One's technology. They've got they're a Dublin, Ireland based company. They've got this kind of novel heart failure monitoring system. They shared a picture with me of their system, and it's kind of this implantable sensor. We'll find out more about it down the road, but kind of I might be wrong, but it kind of looks a lot like a very large stent that you put into the inferior vena cava in the abdomen, and it's and then there's a wearable monitor, and it provides an alert when it senses fluid build up. So this is like a technology that could hopefully provide some early warning to people with heart failure that the condition is worsening. So it's really neat to see where this goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, Fire One, as Sean wrote this, as indicated in the article. I mean, this was started when Covidian and the Foundry sort of paired up in Ireland to begin developing medical device startups there. I hadn't heard about it for a while, but it's nice to see. I guess they last raised capital in 2018. Yeah, and certainly, sensor technology has come a long way, so it's going to be fascinating to see where this fits into everything. Paul, are you familiar with?
I'm certainly familiar with Fire One and many other companies that are similar or going after a similar solution. I really like Connor and the team there, and obviously this is coming from the Foundry, which is just a great engine for innovation in our space, and I love seeing those companies not only progressing but raising oversubscribed rounds, which is really terrific to see.
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy about that.
More good news! Yay!
Yay! There we go. It keeps on coming. So
let's see. It's your list.
We're not naturally somber people, Tom. So
That's
it's
right.
nice to have some cheery news. Number 3 on the list. Our MDO managing editor, Jim Hammer, and he loves to dig into things sometimes, and he helped out Mass Device some because when he was looking around at a bunch of regulatory filings, they appear to have tipped off what Medtronic is thinking of calling its new dialysis venture that they're doing with DaVita. I mean, Medtronic's kind of in the process of spinning out some businesses. It looks like, are you ready? Ready for what this might be called?
We are ready.
It's going to be called Mozark.
All right.
I would love to hear from Medtronic what that means. I personally am picturing some kind of mythical creature that lives in the Minnesota North Woods. Like instead of saying like I don't think a bear broke into my cabin, it was a Mozark. but I'm sure it's something a lot more cool than that, So
well, I think, like you said in your LinkedIn post, I think it does sort of suggest Mozart artistry, and then arc to me kind of goes up. So it's got kind of a rising energy to it.
Mozart, yeah.
Paul, any thoughts on the name, Paul?
I'm not a name and trademark guy. I call my company Medtech Innovator.
How'd you come up with that? I don't understand.
People say to me all the time, they're like, you should use a name that doesn't mean anything, that that's super unique. Like, why don't you call it like Zimby or something? Zimby. Like people just not Zimvi.
Right. Zimvi.
People, I hear that all the time. People are like, use these names that are unique and kind of evoke something, but and I'm like, I just like the Medtech Innovator. Yeah, we know exactly what we're doing. Yeah. I don't know. Mozart sounds like Mozart to me. And I think that sounds good. It's not a surgical navigation system, which would have to have some kind of symphonic or, composer. They always seem to have, right? A lot of them have something or artist or some artist name. But anyways, it sounds great to me. I like it.
No, and as I said on your post, Chris, I'm just glad there's no missing vowels that you kind of get confused by. There's no capital letters stuck in the middle randomly that they insist that you capitalize. It's capitalized, and it's not all lowercase. Thank you very much for that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Medtronic.
Yeah, we don't have to have that fight. So, no, that works for me. All right, Chris Newmarker. Let us roll on to the next Newmarker's Newsmaker. Number two, correct?
Number two on the list. This was another really good article from Jim. What he he was finding here was the materials are mostly down now, but Medtronic had a lot actually up online about the early retirement program, retirement incentives that they've been offering their workers. They've been talking about how they're seeking significant expense reductions before the end of their fiscal year in April, and part of this was they were engaging in this big early retirement push. It was the first one that they've done since 2020, which, they'd done this back then when they started the big reorganization, we had the pandemic going on. But we've had, as Paul was even saying, all these companies, trying just to get more efficient. We've had, this is all going on in Medtronic at the same time that we've seen some, major layoffs at other medical device companies. Unfortunately, on Mass Device, we've reported on layoffs involving more than 19,000 Medtech workers at this point, and we have a whole roundup you can just look up on Mass Device that goes through all the layoffs we've covered. We'll see what happens at Medtronic. But Paul, what are your thoughts on this? Because as you said, unless like a pharmaceutical company comes up with an immortality pill, I think there'll be reason to sell medical devices. So that, and we've definitely had some recession, proof qualities to the industry in the past. But what do you think's going on with just in general why we're seeing all these layoffs in medtech right now?
Well, you guys have done such a great job of covering this. I love how you've been tracking for the overall industry, not just for any one company, but just kind of your overall tracking. I don't think anyone else is doing this, and I really appreciate that you guys are doing it. It's certainly a really hard thing to see some of these layoffs. I think in general, there's some really good people getting let go, and who've had long careers at these companies. In some cases, there are people who were not there for very long, but there are others that we know who have been in some of these companies for like their whole career, almost. And maybe it was time for them to go. Maybe this was, exactly the right time for them to go move on. And, I have to say, I tell my startups all the time when there's things like this going on that this is the best time to start a company or to be looking for staff, because there's some amazing people who bring so much knowledge and who would never have left their comfortable jobs that are now available. And what an amazing opportunity to secure some just incredible talent at probably better prices than we could have a year ago. So, if they're transitioning, they're usually transitioning with a nice package, and they're able to come in and be a little more flexible and other things. And obviously startups are a great place to work for flexibility. So anyways, I love that part of this, that there's a lot of really talented people who are now going to be in the job pool. I hate that people are being laid off.
Yeah.
That's just, especially because the toughest part of it is from the people I've talked to, which is only a handful across various companies. They just didn't have any warning. That's the hardest part. People are buying houses and doing things and planning for kids going to college, and then they get a notice that they're being consolidated or they're losing their job, and that's that's just really hard. Yeah. It doesn't help that we have AI now that can do everyone's job. So there's, and I'm only joking a little bit there, but that actually is a real thing, that there's a lot of jobs that I think will be eliminated because of AI. And of course, I believe there's a lot that'll be improved with AI. I'm not a naysayer. I love AI. But it's just a reality that there's a lot of, I was just talking to a friend's niece 2 days ago who wants to get into the Medtech industry. She's, graduating from college. She's interned at places. She's excited about this industry. And we talked all about, why she might want to get into this business. And I said, but you just do need to realize that if we had this conversation a year ago, I might have said, oh, it's going to be really easy for you to get a job. There's all these great companies. And I'm saying, hey, just be prepared. It might take you a little longer. You will land a job, but it might be a little longer. So whether you've been in a company for 20 years or you're just starting your job search, these layoffs are certainly not good. And it's not just the layoffs. The other thing that we have to be aware of that's impacting all sorts of things is that, like in the case of Medtech Innovator, we have these pitch events that we do in different cities as part of our road tour. And we're getting calls from some of our partners saying, hey, we've been asked to cut our travel. And, in some cases they're saying, but we're not going to cut our travel to your event because we really want to come, but we're just letting you know, that we can't come to everything, or that we're going to send less people. And in some extreme cases, people are saying, hey, we can't come to the event. Can you change, the companies that we're going to pitch there, can they pitch in another city? And we have to scramble and make that happen. Or we're only going to come for one day and we need to move things around, which of course we're able to do in most cases. But the reality is that it's not just the layoffs, that budgets are getting cut all over the place. And let's just hope it creates more of a window for innovation to come in from external sources, and people become more and more dependent, as I like, because that's my business, is to find all these innovations that make great products for the big companies. So there's always a silver lining in there somewhere.
Hey, Joe Mullings, how are you, sir?
Good, Tom. How are you? Good to be back on with you, my friend.
I know we were swapping texts over the weekend, and I figured, well, let's talk on Wednesday. Things will be crystal clear on Wednesday. I don't know if I actually thought that. And I don't know. It felt like 3 weeks ago. Number one, I can't believe it's only been 3 days. Number two, I'm not sure how clear things are from my perspective, which is why we have you on the program. I know you're talking to a lot of folks about Silicon Valley Bank and the aftermath. People have the access to their money. That was the primary concern, but I'm not feeling a lot of clicking of heels out there. People are really a little uncertain. How are you viewing things? And more importantly, what are you hearing from the folks you're in touch with?
So you're right. I think on Friday it was one of those things. I don't know if you saw that Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise movie of
Cannonball Run?
No, it was the one where the final scene was Burt Reynolds was about 400 meters out in the ocean and he couldn't swim, and Dom DeLuise was with
The
him.
end? Was it the end?
Yeah. And every time they got a little closer to the shore, way out there, Burt Reynolds said he'd go to church every day. He would give up his swearing, his drinking. But as he got closer and closer to the shore, the negotiations became a lot different with the end. So I think on Thursday, I got my first, I'll admit this, I got my first tweet from a VC at 2:12 p.m. on Thursday of SVB's going under, get your money out now, right? And so we know what transpired over the next 48 hours. And then I started to get a barrage of texts and phone calls at Sunday night. I was watching the Players' Championship. It was right at the end of it. And it was the government backstopped SVB, which was the proper thing to do. Regardless of what your opinion is of the venture community and everything else that went on, independent of that, it was the right thing to do. So I think everybody had their primary wish sort of granted. They're having access to their money, but it does a little reminiscent of the end is now they're bitching and moaning where 48 hours before, if not before. So look, this is what I'm hearing. And these are the questions to ask. SVB I don't think it was an outlier situation. It was a convergence of a number of things. And again, I'm not a banking expert, so let me put that out there. But this is what I do know. You've got a bank who had primarily one business model that drove its behavior, right? A very, very, very high risk environment of organizations that don't necessarily churn off revenue. They have these large sums of money sitting in the bank to make payroll, and in our world, underwrite clinical trials and underwrite development. You've got 8 interest, and the way the bank hedges against that is that interest rate spread. So they're buying mid and long-term vehicles they're locked into. And you've got 8 interest hikes in 12 months. What did you expect to happen? And then you toss into that, I love the venture community. They are a large part of my customer set. And I also tell them they all have lemming-like behavior. What one does or what 3 or 4 do, the rest follow, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So
Me Too investing is a thing.
That's it. It's you can look at that in the robotic world. You can look at that in structural heart. You can look at that in all of that. Is if you got a chip in that game, I've got a chip in that game. But the scary thing is the venture capitalists communicate primarily in a very viral fashion on Twitter, and a very viral fashion on, I'd say, 8 or 10 of the top VCs probably control 80% of the investments out there right now in the Medtech community. So once they got that signal, and whether you want to put it on Peter Thiel or you want to put it on anybody else, once they got that signal, the run occurred. And it's easy to armchair quarterback that. But what I think this is going to introduce right now, Tom, is a distraction for the next 90 to 120 days. With things just as simple as, look, my vice chair had millions of dollars at SVB. He got it back, and now he's spending some of his time trying to figure out how do you make these micro deposits that will be insured over time. And now are you going to have a whole bunch of banks, or is all that money going to go to Chase or BOA?
Right.
And so the next 90 days is going to be playing defense, because that's what we do as human beings, is we harden targets against the thing that almost just killed us. And then therefore, if attention is a resource and money is a resource, anybody who planned on pitching to a VC over the next 90 days is going to have competition on a survival mechanism that their boards
you're right,
and their investors are going to mandate that they take care of. And this is not an easy thing to do. So I think that's what we're looking at. And that's what my VCs and my startup clients and partners are contending with right now.
So if you're a company looking to raise money right now, you're in trouble. You got some waiting to do.
Well, you had waiting to do anyway.
Yeah.
But I hope your deck has a slide, like I'm at LSI, Scott Pentel's LSI next week, and I'll be at DeviceTalks as well coming up. I can guarantee you everybody is putting a slide in their deck now on fiscal prudence and fiscal responsibility and what their strategy is going to be on banking moving forward.
So do we have a new C-level position at these startups? I guess that's a CFO's job, but that's a whole moving money around to multiple accounts seems like another position.
Well, startups most of the time don't have a full-time CFO. So if I'm a CFO, I'm getting into the interim CFO business right now, and I'm forming my LLC on Monday morning, and I'm getting my CPA out there, and I'm putting my pitch deck together for let me come in for 10 hours a month to make sure that you're backstopped, and let me interact with Chase and BOA, because in the past you were able to run down the path, the well-trodden path with SVB, because you already had done dozens and dozens of deals with them. Well, now you've got new introductions, you've got new pathways to sort of pave. And so I think that's going to slow things down in the venture community. It will not stop them. In fact, I think, and this is too easy to say, it'll be a healthier environment because the big banks will do a better job of safeguarding against things like this.
What about, I was talking with a VC just about SVB's role in sort of driving venture lenders to be a little more competitive and a little more eager to lend to startups and younger companies. Without that force there, are you getting a sense that venture lending is going to be difficult as well?
Yes, I just don't know what degree. So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Look, I've got a banking relationship that I put out there it's 32 years with the same bank, and my ability to expedite things and have them know me, whether it's purchasing another building, equipment investment, studio growth. We just made an acquisition. We closed on Friday of another search firm. Those skids being greased have an immeasurable amount of value to me as an owner and an investor. And so that juice in the game that people had through an SVB is going to be somewhat mitigated over time. Now, I still, again, I think, and I think it's good for the device world. I think it's good for medtech, health tech, just not right now. Not right now. And an environment that already was hostile.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we've talked. I've been through a few of these, but they've always been sort of a larger macro crisis that a big storm that we're just a small spot getting hit by. This seems like a really targeted problem at the innovation economy, and I know SVB is still there. It seems to be a shadow of itself. I don't really know the particulars of it. I don't know if someone still needs to buy it or what, but I don't know how you can weather a larger storm, I think, but when it's something that's hitting you so directly, it's going to take a long time, I think, to work our way back to a place where there's a new bank that's doing what SVB was doing, or multiple banks, hopefully doing what SVB is doing. It doesn't seem like a quick fix.
No, I don't think it's a quick fix, because there's going to be hesitation across the board. There's relationships that have to be made. There's trust that has to be formed. In a business that brags about move fast and break things and fail quick, I don't know if that's the prescription that we're all going to use any longer in the startup world. Look, it's you nailed it. In the past, we were a secondary or tertiary impact because of the housing crisis or because of the dot-com bust. But this came as an acute event out of our ecosystem that then became a contagion for other community banks or smaller banks inside that 16 that we sat with SVB. So we have not had to deal with this before. The medtech industry in particular, life science industry, but medtech, I'm going to stay where you and I, really our hearts are, is we have never been the reason for the failure. We have had to deal with the failure, the economic failure, because of other categories or industries. We are the catalyst for this right now. And in some cases, candidly, I think the current administration just delayed organizations' ultimate outcome because we got our money. And I think some of these startups were heading towards a less than optimal outcome even before this happened. But I think this is going to expedite it now. And, you always need these prunings. Look, it's terrible for our business. It's terrible for your business.
Yeah.
But it's just managing through it right now. But I think this is the very first time Medtech has ever been the primary instigator of an event. And so it will be interesting to see how people pony up and own it, how people take care of the ecosystem itself before themselves. I read a great article about SVB, and my heart goes out to all the people who are at SVB and what they did amazingly for 40 years. And I'm sad to see the backs turned on it as well. I mean, I've got no skin in that game, full disclosure, no money in that bank, but it certainly was an important component of why our industry is so amazing.
Sure, absolutely. All right, so to wrap up, I feel like I'm hearing CEOs of startups are looking inward and culling programs and tightening screws and making sure they're maximizing every dollar. And VCs are probably doing the same thing with their portfolio, giving it a harder look, seeing which ones we can live with and which ones we can live without. Is that sort of where we're at right now?
Yeah, and that was happening before last Thursday afternoon, Friday, but it's especially sort of confirmed now. And you may see an entire mess of 10-year funds having to terminate a B or C round investment, where in the past they may have kept it on life support for either IP or hoping something else was going to come down range. And I think you're going to see people who are willing to take a lead on an investment absolutely won't even be able to do that right now over the next 60 to 90 days because of the situation we went through last Thursday and Friday.
Okay. And I should have raised this before. Lastly, last time you were here, we talked about the big companies and the reductions in workforce we were anticipating there. This isn't going to help that. Any feeling as to whether this is exacerbating that problem, whether it's a just different part of the economy, it's not going to make it better or worse? I know a number of the medtechs had banking with SVB, but I don't know what degree. Some had venture lending from SVB. But how do you see this impacting medtech workforce on a larger cap, sort of publicly traded scale?
I don't see it impacting that much at all. I think that die was cast. What I do think, though, is you're going to see an uptick in M&A activity. So I think on the strategics, they might be getting in earlier, where in the past they were waiting for clearance on the FDA and showing an uptake on sales. I do think that they're sending some products and platforms out to pasture and going to double down on the others that they know are their core competency. So I think all in all, the big strategics, this doesn't hit them very hard. But with that, they termed a lot of their, or riffed a lot of their, what they refer to as R&D people, creative product developments, and have sort of taken those off the balance sheet. And that tells me that they're committed to now having to acquire that technology externally. And I think all in all, that is a positive outlook over the next 6 to 12 months that you can look forward to.
All right. Well, it's going to be an interesting conference season with LSI coming up in DeviceTalks Boston in a month or so. So thanks for the insights, Joe. Look forward to having you back, hopefully with some good news. It'd be great to talk about some good news sometime.
Always, my friend. I appreciate the opportunity.
I guess I kind of want to get into what the world looks like now, Paul. I kind of made the joke about the Wall and Game of Thrones. I guess you didn't really appreciate, you did, what the role that Silicon Valley Bank played in the innovation economy. You obviously did. They were at every event. They were great sponsors. We had John Norris at DeviceTalks Boston giving his presentation. It's always a great presentation. They were a pillar of the innovation industry, not only medtech. They're still around. They're still trying to remain relevant, but certainly according to one VC I talked to, they really kind of drove other venture lenders to lend more. They really drove other banks to be more accommodating. Without that force, it's going to be harder, I think, and you know this better than us, I think harder to run a company, harder to run a startup. You just won't have that help that you had previously. What does the aftermath look like to you?
Well, your analogy is a really good one of Game of Thrones and the wall coming down. That wall came down and we watched all the dragons and everybody flying in right there at the end with the walkers. And we thought, oh my God, how can they possibly survive?
Yep.
But they did. So that's a great analogy.
You're right.
It is really something that, as I said, I think everyone needs to have their eyes open and recognize that an external factor that they probably weren't worried about before was, will I be able to take the money out of the bank?
Yeah.
That I deposited there? Not will I be able to raise money and get to my Series B or finish my clinical study, which is enough stress, or my Series C or whatever it is. But will I even be able to make payroll next week with that? I have $5 million in the bank, and will I be able to, access it? Is not something that most people were thinking about 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, and now they are. And it's just a new. So we're going to see all sorts of new board actions at companies and covenants that require people to have multiple banks and no more than a certain dollar amount in every bank, and you're going to see that kind of stuff. It's kind of ironic that like everyone is now going, oh quick, we have to run to a safe name like JP Morgan, Chase, or whomever, Wells Fargo, and just when it wasn't that long ago, as we were kind of pointing out, that those were the banks that everybody was worried about, and along with everybody. So it's not like. Of course, I think people should do things that are prudent and follow a practice that does allow them to make sure their money is accessible, right? That's really important. I heard people talking about some crazy things about putting their money in things that were like non-banks, even. Certainly not cryptocurrency. That would be a terrible idea for you to take your, hard-earned dollars and turn raised dollars and turn those into Ethereum or Bitcoin. I think would probably not be a wise decision. But people were considering all sorts of, strategies, other countries, other safer countries we can transfer our money to. The Canadian dollar used to be stronger. Maybe we should go to Canada. That's what happened in the last crisis. Canadian banks lent. So who knows where we're going? But aside from the financial, where do I put my money? The other thing is, as I think I've been starting to say more often now, is it's not what are the ripples that are going to happen as a result. It's what are the aftershocks that may happen. We're seeing. I got an email from one of our companies saying, don't worry, we're at First Republic Bank and they're just fine. And now we're all waking up to, First Republic Bank is in the cover of the Wall Street Journal and everything else now about people trying to make sure they're safe. And there won't be the last. And so I think there's just, there's a number of things.
Talking on a Thursday evening and, we've got, we even like the headlines right now are saying like, First Republic is, exploring, rescue options, and there's, like headlines about them. I guess their stock, Barron's is saying their stock is soaring now because some big banks are coming to the rescue, supposedly. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. How special. Like First Republic, obviously that they're very active on the coast. I see them as kind of like more of a bank that's like for like high net worth individuals. How special was Silicon Valley Bank compared to some of these other like regional community banks that, we have around the country that are kind of in a bit of trouble right now?
Yeah, I think Silicon Valley Bank is certainly a special bank. Has been a special bank, and I hope will continue to be a special bank in the future. The people who we know there and know very well are all still working there. They didn't call me and say, oh, well, I got a pink slip and you guys hiring. And I'm not saying they may not be looking. Maybe they should be. But, they're not calling me and saying that. They're sending out emails saying, hey, here's what's going on. Here's a message from our CEO. We hope you'll still continue to actively work with us. So that's encouraging, but they are a special bank. They've made it possible for a lot of companies to to be able to reach patients or be able to achieve that next milestone because they were able to provide that venture debt. And by the way, venture debt also, is something that people have to be very careful about in any environment because it does change the economics at a company. And sometimes it makes it, some investors love venture debt and some hate it. And we've always had like these discussions at, various companies about whether or not they should raise venture debt or whether they just take more equity. There are issues with having venture debt, one of which, a big deal was that if you were at, a Silicon Valley bank or another bank that has venture debt, and there's a bunch of them, one of the covenants is that you have all your money there. So,
there you go too.
And that's okay, thanks for the loan. And now all my money is in your bank. There's just little things that I think are going to change as a result, and that may go away. But they were a really important part of this economy, and I hope they continue to be. We need banks that are willing to take risks on innovation, on tech, and aren't just going to use the normal factors that a lender would do. We need people who are willing to back this industry. So we need them.
I've heard the argument in the past that just on top of the lending and what they were able to provide, for especially like a startup, if you find a good banking partner, I mean they can be a really good advisor for your company, especially when you're trying to figure out how to work things financially and raise money.
It's funny. Silicon Valley Bank, the day that all this was going on, the first day, Thursday, was still sending messages to us just saying, hey, we're going to set up a meeting next week with investors and wanted to see if some of your companies want to go to that. They do that kind of stuff all the time where, it wasn't just lending money to companies and giving them bank accounts and whatever else they're doing to manage their money. Silicon Valley Bank would convene investors every year at various dinners and various functions and just bring their clients who were trying to raise capital to meet a whole bunch of investors that weren't aware of them. So they served a function, as you said, Chris, that transcended banking and just the banking relationship. They are and were a major actor in helping to make sure that these companies get financed and that, you could call, as you said, John Norris or some of the other people over at SVB and say, hey, I'm looking for a good board member. And they go, oh, have you talked to so-and-so? They're really great. And I think they might be looking for, they just plugged in a way that, your Wells Fargo will not be.
Right.
And no offense to Wells Fargo, I'm saying they just aren't in that, they don't have that finger on the pulse. They're not sitting in those discussions at board meetings and things that SVB might be or observing. So anyways, I think they are very special, and I hope that they in some new iteration do survive.
I hope so. That something like if they don't continue, that something comes up that like kind of fills that what looks like it's kind of like a void that could be created. I would add too, probably people in your space, Paul, I suspect they're probably very grateful about how the FDIC did their job around this and the Fed, just because, I mean, it could have been weeks, but they, there was a recognition that this wasn't just, just any old, community bank, mid-sized regional bank. I mean, boy, I just have a feeling, just looking at how it all went down, that it could have been a lot worse.
It could have been a lot worse. There's no question. There were some very smart people saying, expect to only have access to half of your capital next week. And that's not what happened. So I'm really glad that didn't happen. I think it could have been a lot worse. But as I said, if you think it's over, you're fooling yourself. There will be aftershocks of various things coming up. And whether it's investors who, as I said, who maybe we're going to invest in a company and who are now backing out, or whether it's a fund that won't, have their close because somebody says, oh, maybe I don't want to do, any tech investing, not just Medtech. I'm just going to go somewhere else now. Whatever it is, anything that shakes confidence is not good. And that's just the reality. And we need to all have our eyes wide open that it is not business as usual.
Things are cautious now. There's just more of a feeling of caution and less willing to take risks.
Yeah. It's just uncertainty is not good. And, it's just like, years ago, this is all completely changed, but years ago, we all know that FDA, had, not great communication and other things that have been radically improved now. But at the time, though, that uncertainty, will FDA change my clinical trial requirements after I finish it? I think people are less worried about now. But back then, that uncertainty, scared people away from investing in medtech. Anything. So, and they've, as I said, FDA has largely fixed that, and actually, has a whole new program called TAP that's designed to really fix that. But the point is that anything that is that adds risk or adds uncertainty is not good for any of us. And so, it's something we didn't need. As you said, you use your other analogy about the wall coming down. As I said, everyone survived. Not everybody, but a lot of people. A lot of
characters, Paul. A lot of characters didn't make it.
Not Daenerys Targaryen, though.
Darn it.
Annie, she didn't survive. I didn't see that coming. I thought she was going to be on the throne. But anyways, a lot of people survived after she burned the entire city. She deserved it at the end.
Didn't make any sense. Anyway, what happened? No.
I know, but
all right.
We're going way off the rails here.
When it comes to our business, I do believe that the standard, line of what doesn't kill us makes us stronger is real, and we will have there will be many, many silver linings that come from what today certainly is not. It looks a little bleak between what's happening in the banking industry, what's happening with layoffs broadly in tech, including medtech. I think there'll be plenty of great people sitting around the table years from now going, "Oh, I'm so glad that happened, because that's how we met our co-founder, and that's why we were able to, acquire that really interesting company. And now that person's running our division and whatever." There will be a lot of those kinds of conversations. So I'm looking forward to those. All
right. Well, it's a great way to end the episode. Chris Newmarker, now's the time when we're going to tell folks how to find us on. So actually, Paul Grand, you're our guest. Where can folks find out more information about Medtech Innovator and connect with you on social media?
I thought you were going to ask me for your call. I was going to give all of your social media handles.
You're welcome to try.
But I'll start with me. So no, Paul, it's very easy to find me. I'm Paul at medtechinnovator.org. You can find us at medtechinnovator.org on the web, on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. Same thing, Paul Grand. Just search for Paul Grand and Medtech Innovator. You'll find me. On Twitter, which I don't use nearly as much anymore, I'm Life Science VC.
And of course, you'll be at DeviceTalks Boston on May 10th and 11th with some of your Medtech Innovator graduates.
I can't wait. That is going to be such a great conference. It was fantastic last year, and we're so excited to be able to bring 20 of our graduates who are executing incredibly well and who are fundraising. And we're going to have one of our first of a series of investor events to feature those at DeviceTalks. And we're really excited about that. Hope you'll come to the conference. You will not be disappointed in either the conference, which is fantastic, or our companies.
Fantastic. And Chris Newmarker, where can folks find you?
Hey, you can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a new marker. Also on Twitter at Newmarker, but I'm definitely more on LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn is the place, I think.
Absolutely.
At least for now.
I'm on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi, Salemi. I am on Twitter occasionally at MedTech Tom. And Chris Newmarker, say it.
You got to follow, subscribe.
That's right. You got to follow, and or subscribe to the DeviceTalks Podcast Network. You'll get every week DeviceTalks Weekly. And you'll also receive Stryker Talks, Intuitive Talks, Boston Scientific Talks, launches on March 29th. And we'll be rolling out our newest podcast. It's already sold out, Abbott Talks, which is happening in June. So lots of talks, lots of MedTech content coming your way. Subscribe to DeviceTalks Podcast Network. And while you're subscribing on Google, Apple, Spotify, whatever, we're on all of them. Make sure you subscribe to Medtronic Talks as well, so you can receive those episodes. We'll be rolling out a new season of Medtronic Talks starting most likely in April. So lots of great audio medtech content coming your way. So, and of course, we mentioned DeviceTalks Boston. Join us May 10th and 11th. You can register at devicetalks.com. It's going to be a great 2 days. The agenda just keeps growing and growing, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to getting together, and we'll have had a little time, I think, between now and then, sort of assessing the situation, and I'm sure we'll see some more positives in early May and mid-May. So join us there at DeviceTalks Boston. So Paul, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, as always. I would like, follow, and subscribe, but I'm already doing all of those. So I'll just tell other people to do it. It's fantastic to be here. I love this podcast. I drove home from San Diego yesterday and listened to, I think, 2 different episodes of DeviceTalks. So thank you for doing what you guys do.
Ooh, thank you.
Hey, everybody, you got to be cool like Paul. Like, follow, subscribe. There we go. Right. Well, take care, everybody. No more winter is coming. Like, spring's on the way.
Well said.